You're at 109 right now.
You're listening to the musical stylings of Charlie Yardbird Parker. In my hands, I hold a copy of Ross Russell's book entitled Bird Lives. The reason I'm holding this book is because I purchased it recently from thriftbooks.com. Actually, I put in the order at Amazon and the order was fulfilled by Thrift Books. Shout out to Thrift Books. I bought a number of books from Thrift Books in the past, actually. I chose this book, Ross Russell's book entitled Bird Lives, because this text, this one that I'm holding in my hands right now, this is the book that Jean Michel Basquiat read as well as bought a number of copies of and kept at his studio apartment where he worked and created his artwork. And for visitors to his apartment and studio, he would hand out copies of this book, this very book that I hold in my hands. The significance of holding the same book in my hands that Jean Michel Basquiat had passed out to others. Well, correction. It's not a book that Jean Michel Basquiat literally held. Well, I don't know the history of this particular text. It's a little worn. Who knows? There could be a signature or there could be a sign that Jean Michel actually held on to this book. That would be wild to discover. But anyway, the significance of holding the same book, the same title, is that Jean Michel Basquiat found it enlightening and he found it very important, for for himself to read this book. And this book inspired his artwork because it informed Basquiat of Charlie Parker's life. And so by holding this book in my hands, I have the opportunity to read the book, to learn about the life of Charlie Parker. But in turn, I will learn about the man who inspired Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I will also learn the parallels, or I will learn what Jean-Michel Basquiat found important about this book, about Charlie Parker's life. So, in one sense, I'm going to learn about one man, but I'm also going to learn about another. And everything is everything. So, even though these are two separate men who lived two separate lives, their lives paralleled. The experiences they had, I'm sure they both experienced. These were not just completely separate lives and there was no intersection. No, like a Venn diagram, there was overlap, which is why Jean-Michel found the book so important in his life, in his lifetime. So I'm looking forward to reading this text. I wanted to record a little something about it before I embark on the journey. I found another book about Charlie Parker, one that I believe I got from Thrift Books. I thought that was the book. I thought that was the text that Jean-Michel had bought a number of copies of and put in his studio to pass out to visitors. But I discovered that it wasn't the same book, or rather, it isn't the same book. How I discovered it is when I visited the King Pleasure exhibit right here in Los Angeles at the Grand LA, which is now finished. It finished 5 days ago on January 1st. It actually finished, I think, December 31st was the last day. And then by January 1st, there were no more tickets being sold. So the 31st of December was the last day. Anyhow, when I went there, There was a reconstruction, what is it? A replica of Jean Michel's studio, his studio apartment where he created his artwork. There was a room there, and in that room there were a number of VHS tapes, cassette tapes, that Jean Michel would watch or have playing while he was creating his artwork. And then there was, there were numerous books, a few stacks of books everywhere that became Jean Michel's source material. And one of those titles was Bird Lives. Now, I hadn't noticed this. There were other books that caught my attention in Jean Michel's replica of his studio. Such books as Robert Farris Thompson's Flash of the Spirit. That is a textbook that I think Jean Michel mentions in an interview, but it's also in a documentary where they talk about Flash of the Spirit. And also in another documentary, I believe it was the documentary entitled Radiant Child, where the author, Robert Farris Thompson, was interviewed, and he talked about Basquiat's artwork. So that was very cool, very neat. In addition to Robert Farris Thompson's book, there were a number of other titles, many of which I do not recall at the moment, but I remember Flash of the Spirit and then Bird Lives. Now, I had been to this exhibit when I was in New York, but then I also went to the exhibit in Los Angeles. The story behind that is, well, I thought the exhibit was only going to be in New York, so I flew to New York to see it. I saw it one time there, but when it came to Los Angeles, I went between 6 or 10 times. I don't know. I've got to look at my receipts to figure out how many times I went there. Quite a number of times. But it was only on the last visit when I talked with one of the workers there, one of the managers, the exhibit, one of the dudes. His name is Patrick, and Patrick told me about the book, told me about this book, Bird Lives, and he was like, "Yeah, there are copies in the studio," and I was like, "Word?" Like I had missed that. I had missed those details, that particular detail. And so I was like, well, let me go back to that room, that gallery. So I went back and I looked very carefully, and there it was. There were actually 2 copies, which confirmed what I had read before. It said that Basquiat had a number of these copies and he would pass them out to, people. So there were at least 2 copies in the replica of his studio. It was now, mind you, the studio is the room where he died at like 57 Great Jones Street in New York City, in the Bowery, or the I don't know. I don't know New York like that. I think that's where it is. No, I know the address, but I don't know if it's the Bowery, if it's the Lower East Side, or those little pockets. But it certainly is Great Jones Street, something like that. 57 Great Jones. I've been there too. Okay, so I said all that to tell you that I learned something about Basquiat having copies of this book in his studio to pass out. And then there at the replica of his studio apartment, there they were, at least 2 copies of the book. And I was like, there it is. I was like, Jean Michel wanted people to read this book, so now I've got to get a copy. And like I said, I thought I had the copy, but it was the wrong book. It was another book about Charlie Parker's life. I forgot the author, but now that I have this book in my hands, Ross Russell's Bird Lives in my hands, I'm going to embark on reading this. And then I guess I'll come back and I'll tell you a little bit more about the journey of reading this book and what I've learned. I already know 2 things that are parallel between, well, I mean, a number of things. Like, Charlie Parker was a heroin addict. Jean Michel Basquiat was a heroin addict as well. Charlie Parker died in an apartment, I believe, of a heroin overdose, and Jean Michel died of a heroin overdose in an apartment as well. Similarities, right? So everything is everything. I've got the book in my hands right now. I'm going to crack it open. I'm going to read it, and that's going to be my evening this January 6th, Saturday. It's 5:46 p.m. So let me get into this book. Once again, you're listening to IC 109. I'm Larry Wiggs. Pick up a copy of this book. It's out of print now, and I believe this is the only copy that they had left. It does have a, what is this? A dust cover. And from what I learned, dust covers are important, and they make the value of the book. So I've got to make sure to keep this book in as best condition as possible. All right, at 11:09, I'm a peace out.
You're at 109 right now.